He had judged thousands before, but this audition made him question everything he thought he knew about courage. The Got Talent stage buzzed with its usual electricity, spotlights carved through the darkness, like golden swords, illuminating the iconic red buzzer that had ended so many dreams. The audience filled every seat, their anticipation crackling in the air like static before a storm. Behind the judges' table, cameras waited like silent predators, ready to capture the next moment of television magic. Simon Cowell adjusted his black jacket and leaned back in his leather chair, his expression set in its familiar mask of professional skepticism. To his left and right, his fellow judges chatted quietly, but Simon's attention was already focused on the wings of the stage. Kids who had never noticed him would become his friends, drawn to the quiet strength they now recognized in him. His mother would frame the newspaper article about his performance and hang it in their kitchen, where Michael would see it every morning as a reminder of the night he chose to be seen. The ripple effects would spread far beyond one boy's transformation. Schools would implement new anti-bullying programs. Teachers would receive training on recognizing and nurturing quiet students. Children across the world would find the courage to speak up, to sing out, to take up space they had always deserved, but never claimed. But that night, under the Got Talent lights, all that mattered was this: a boy who had spent his life being invisible had finally been seen, and in seeing him, everyone watching had learned to see themselves a little more clearly too. Because sometimes the most powerful talent isn't what you can do, it's who you have the courage to do. That night, the world saw not just a singer, but the heart of every person who had ever felt visible, finally finding their voice. And in that moment, television became something it rarely achieves, a mirror that shows us not who we are, but who we can become when we choose compassion over judgment, understanding over dismissal, and recognition over indifference. The lights dimmed on another episode of Got Talent, but the light Michael had kindled in that arena, and in the hearts of everyone watching, would burn long after the cameras stopped rolling. Teachers were making mental notes to pay attention to the quiet ones in their classrooms. Bullies were feeling an unfamiliar tightness in their chest, perhaps understanding for the first time the weight of their words and actions. The host approached them on stage, microphone in hand, but for once seemed at a loss for words. This wasn't the kind of moment that could be wrapped up with a clever quip or transition to commercial break. This was real life, messy and beautiful and transformative, happening in real time under the bright lights. Michael wiped his eyes with the back of his sleeve, but he was smiling now, a genuine, radiant smile that transformed his entire face. "Thank you," he whispered to Simon, his voice stronger than it had been all evening. "No," Simon replied, his own voice thick with emotion. "Thank you. You reminded us all of something we'd forgotten." As they made their way back toward the judges' table, Simon noticed something remarkable happening in the audience. People weren't just clapping, they were talking to each other. Strangers were sharing stories. Parents were hugging their children tighter. The invisible boy had made everyone else visible too, creating connections in a room full of people who had come expecting nothing more than entertainment. Later, much later, after the cameras stopped rolling and the audience had gone home, Simon would sit in his dressing room, thinking about that moment. He would remember his own 12-year-old self, and he would understand that sometimes the most important thing a judge can do isn't to critique, it's to recognize when someone has already won something far more valuable than any competition. 3 weeks later, the video would have 50 million views. Michael would sing at his school, talent show to standing ovation that lasted 5 full minutes. His teachers would start calling on him in class, and he would answer with confidence that surprised even himself. "I ate lunch alone, pretending to read so no one would see that I had no friends to sit with. I knew what it felt like to be invisible, to wonder if anyone would care if I just disappeared one day. Simon's voice caught slightly, the memory still sharp after all these years. And I want you to know that what just happened here, what you just did, took more courage than anything I've ever seen on this stage in 23 years. The arena was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. You came here hoping someone would see you. But here's what I want you to understand. We didn't just see you tonight. The whole world saw you, and what they saw was extraordinary. Simon stood and gestured to the audience, to the cameras, to the vast space around them. You are not invisible, Michael Thompson. You are unforgettable. The boy's composure finally broke. Tears streamed down his cheeks as Simon pulled him into a hug that lasted long enough for every camera in the building to capture it, long enough for the moment to burn itself into the memory of everyone watching. When they separated, Simon looked out at the audience, then back at Michael. You know what the really beautiful thing is? Tomorrow, when you go back to school, everything's going to be different. Not because you were on television, but because you've remembered who you are. And once you remember that, once you really know it, no one can make you invisible ever again. The audience erupted again, and this time Simon joined them, applauding the boy who had reminded a room full of strangers what it meant to be brave. As the cameras captured every angle of this moment, something profound was happening beyond the television magic. In homes across the country, parents were pausing their evening routines to call their children closer to the screen. Scattered throughout the crowd, children who had felt invisible themselves cheered louder than they ever had before, seeing their own struggles reflected in the small figure on stage. But Simon remained seated, his hands pressed flat against the judge's table, staring at Michael with an expression that cameramen would later describe as thunderstruck. The boy stood in his circle of light, no longer trying to shrink away from it, looking utterly stunned by the response. His oversized shirt seemed less like a hiding place, now and more like the uniform of someone who had just discovered his own power. Behind the cameras, production assistants wiped their eyes. Sound engineers who had heard thousands of auditions found themselves reaching for tissues. Even the security guards, trained to remain stoic during emotional moments, stood a little straighter, moved by what they had witnessed. Simon's fellow judges were gesturing frantically for him to say something, anything, but he seemed frozen in place. In his mind, he was 12 again, sitting alone in a school cafeteria, watching other kids laugh at tables he would never be invited to join. He remembered the weight of invisibility, how it pressed down on your shoulders until you learned to carry it like a stone in your chest. Finally, Simon rose slowly from his chair, his movement deliberate and weighted with purpose. His fellow judges were already on their feet, tears streaming down their faces. But Simon moved with the careful precision of someone who understood that this moment was bigger than television, bigger than entertainment. He walked around the judges' table, past the cameras that tracked his every step, toward the stage steps. The audience quieted gradually, the applause fading to an expectant hush as they sensed something significant was about to happen. Even the camera operators seemed to hold their breath, instinctively understanding that they were about to capture something extraordinary. Simon climbed onto the stage and walked directly to Michael, who looked up at him with wide, uncertain eyes. The distance between them seemed to stretch across more than just a few feet of polished stage. It bridged decades of shared experience, of understanding what it meant to be overlooked and underestimated. Michael, Simon said, his voice carrying clearly through the arena without need for amplification. I want to tell you something that I wish someone had told me when I was your age. He knelt down so he was at eye level with the boy, and in that moment, the massive arena felt as intimate as a living room conversation. When I was your age, I was you. I sat in the back of classrooms, hoping teachers wouldn't notice me. 23 years of judging talent had taught him to read people before they even opened their mouths. The confident ones strutted out. The nervous ones shuffled. The delusional ones practically floated. But when the next contestant emerged from the shadows, Simon frowned. A small figure appeared at the edge of the spotlight. A boy who couldn't have been older than 12, wearing an oversized button-down shirt that seemed to swallow his thin frame. His brown hair fell across his forehead, partially hiding eyes that darted nervously between the floor and the massive audience that stretched before him like an ocean of expectant faces. The boy took 3 steps forward, then stopped. His hands trembled at his sides. "Come on out, don't be shy," called the host, his voice echoing through the arena with forced cheerfulness. The boy took another hesitant step, then another, but something was wrong. Simon had seen stage fright before. The sweaty palms, the stuttering, the forgotten lyrics. But this was different. This child moved like he was trying to disappear, even as he walked toward center stage, each footstep seeming to require enormous effort. The audience began to murmur. Someone coughed. A few scattered laughs rippled through the crowd, not cruel but impatient. This was prime-time television, after all. Entertainment. Energy. Not whatever this was. Simon leaned forward slightly, his trained eye cataloging details. The boy's shirt was clean, but clearly second-hand. His shoes were scuffed, but it wasn't poverty that made Simon pause. It was the way the child held himself, shoulders curved inward, as if trying to take up as little space as possible. "What's your name, son?" Simon's voice cut through the murmurs, surprisingly gentle. The boy looked up for just a moment, and Simon caught a glimpse of intelligent brown eyes before they darted away again. "Michael," came the whispered reply, so quiet the microphones barely caught it. "Michael what?" "Michael Thompson." The silence stretched. Simon glanced at his fellow judges, reading the same question in their expressions. Was this kid actually going to perform? Or were they witnessing television's most awkward moment? "How old are you, Michael?" 12. "And what are you going to do for us today?" Michael's mouth opened, then closed. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. The audience was growing restless now, the energy in the room shifting from anticipation to something approaching pity. Simon felt his patience wearing thin. He'd built his career on honesty, on cutting through pretense to find real talent. But this felt like watching someone slowly drown on national television. "Michael," Simon said, his voice sharper now, "you need to tell us why you're here. This is Got Talent, not a therapy session." The words hit their mark. Michael flinched, as if he'd been slapped, and for a moment Simon thought the boy might actually run off stage. Instead, something extraordinary happened. Michael's chin lifted. Not much, just a fraction of an inch, but enough. When he spoke, his voice was still quiet, but it carried a clarity that hadn't been there before. "I came here because no one sees me." The arena went dead silent. "At school, I sit in the back of every class. I eat lunch alone. When teachers call on students, they never call on me. It's like I'm not even there." Michael's voice grew slightly stronger, though his gaze remained fixed on his shoes. "My mom says I have a good voice, but I don't know if that's true because she's my mom, and moms are supposed to say that." He paused, swallowing hard. I thought maybe if I came here just once, someone might actually see me, really see me." The silence that followed was different from before. It wasn't impatient or uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that happens when an entire room of people suddenly understands something they hadn't expected to learn. Simon felt an unexpected tightness in his chest. He'd heard thousands of sob stories over the years, some genuine, some carefully crafted for sympathy votes. But there was something about the way this boy spoke, the quiet honesty in his voice, that cut through all of Simon's professional defenses. "What are you going to sing?" Simon asked, his voice noticeably softer. "Invisible" by Hunter Hayes. Of course he was. Michael looked up then, meeting Simon's eyes, for just a moment, and Simon saw something that made his breath catch. It wasn't talent, or determination, or any of the usual qualities he looked for in contestants. It was hope, fragile, desperate hope wrapped in a 12-year-old's courage. The boy moved to center stage, and the spotlight followed him, creating a circle of light in the vast darkness. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and opened his mouth. What came out was magic. Michael's voice soared through the arena, clear and pure and heartbreakingly beautiful. It wasn't the polished sound of a trained performer. It was something rarer. It was truth set to melody, pain transformed into art. Every note carried the weight of lonely lunch hours and empty desks, of being overlooked and underestimated and forgotten. But as the song progressed, something else crept in. Strength, resilience. The quiet power of someone who had been invisible for so long that he'd learned to see everything, including himself, with perfect clarity. Simon found himself gripping the edge of the judge's table. Around him, he could hear the soft sounds of people crying. In the audience, phones had come out, not to scroll through social media, but to record this moment. Parents clutched their children closer. Teachers thought of quiet students they might have overlooked. When Michael reached the chorus, "I'm not invisible, you just don't want to see," his eyes opened, and for the first time since walking on stage, he looked directly at the audience. No longer trying to disappear, no longer apologizing for taking up space. Simon felt something crack inside his chest. The song built to its climax, Michael's voice growing stronger with each line, and Simon realized he was witnessing something he'd rarely seen in over 2 decades of judging. A real transformation happening in real time. This wasn't just a performance, it was a declaration. When the final note faded into silence, the arena erupted. 4,000 people leaped to their feet as one, applauding with a ferocity that made the stage vibrate. In the front row, a middle-aged woman clutched her chest, her face wet with tears as she thought of her own quiet son at home. 3 rows back, a teacher covered her mouth with her hands, mentally cataloging every shy student she'd ever failed to encourage.